Got it.
All right.
Well, hello, folks. Welcome to One Work, Five Questions with David Dietrich and Dr. Mark Holacek. And
That is I.
we're back by popular demand from last week, and we're ready to rock and roll. And anyway, I'm Dave Dietrich, and I am filling in for Donna Wythe, who is on scholarly hiatus. How long is that going to last, by the way?
I don't know. I talked to her and she's still working, studying on for some tests. So to get some sort of history degree or something. So I don't know about
Okay.
the scholarly haze. There's a lot of stress going on. So she's a family woman with two daughters. And so all that stuff's going on.
Well, I wish her luck. I hope she, does well, and I'm sure she will. Anyway, I'm a docent at Thomas Jefferson's historical site here in Virginia, as well as an amateur and published historian. Mark Holacek holds a PhD in history and philosophy. He taught at the University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, Rutgers University at Camden, and I assume that's Camden in in New Jersey, right?
Not in New
Camden,
Jersey,
where
right?
Bob Cratchit used to live.
The vacation capital of the world, by the way.
Oh, right. In Ohio University, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you have written over 26 books on the life and times of Thomas Jefferson.
Yep.
And I believe you have another one coming out shortly, do you not?
Yeah, well, I have a couple coming out. One on the Natural Bridge. I'm revising it right now. I actually have to add about 100 pages to it to get it up to a certain number of words. And, I'm working on that book on the correspondence, and I just submitted that to a publisher. Correspondence between Thomas Jefferson's younger brother, Randolph. We talked about that before personally. And you and I are going to have a trip. You're going to take me on the route that Jefferson took from Charlottesville to Poplar Forest. Is that correct?
That's right. Now, some of it you can't replicate, but we can get as close as we can. Most of the trail you can do it.
So we don't have to jump on a bateau and have a horse-drawn buggy.
No, but getting across the James is going to have to be done with more modern technology. That is a bridge as opposed to the ferry at Warren that doesn't exist any longer.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I can take it to the site where that was located.
So anyway, I'm looking forward to that. I as I told you before, I really want to get a sense for where Randolph had his plantation. And I think it'd be easy enough to figure out. It had to be on a hill because the James, the branch of the James there would have flooded quite often.
Yeah, exactly. And he was right up against the James.
Yeah, and he's at the bottom of that horseshoe there, and he's right on the bottom there. So when I write a book like that, like I wrote at Jefferson in Paris, is Paris yours? I always have to find a map, preferably an old map, and just try to see where Jefferson lived while he's in Paris, his different residences, where his daughters lived, where his getaway spot was with the monks, and all sorts of stuff, where Maria Cosway stayed and so forth. It helps you. It gives you a feel as if almost as if you're there.
Yeah.
I love looking at the maps, and that's one of the reasons why I sort of asked you if we can make this pilgrimage to see where Randolph lived and try to figure out where his residence was, which burned down. But
right.
Anyway, enough of that. We have something to do today, don't we?
Yes, we do. Today's topic concerns a bill once sponsored by Thomas Jefferson, what is known as a bill for the more general diffusion of knowledge. And he started that in 1778, and it was enacted, I believe, in 1779. So what I'd like to do is ask you a series of questions about that letter and hear what you got to say. You ready?
I am. I would just say the bill never passed.
Okay.
It was proposed in 1779, and it was something that we'll talk about why it never passed, and there are good reasons why it didn't pass. Part of the answers to talking about this bill. But it was proposed and never passed, and Jefferson was a bit sour about that, and we'll go on and talk about that in a little bit.
Just to clear the background a bit on that before we get into question number one, I kind of have a question I want to throw out on this, and that is, was in the period that he put that together, was he governor of Virginia at that time, or was this before that time?
No, he wasn't. This is before that. He starts
So it's right
this.
before.
Talk about when he starts this is you'll remember the year 1776.
Correct.
Just after the Declaration, he asks for a leave of absence from the Continental Congress, and he goes out with four other people. Thomas, Ludwell, Lee, George Mason, Edmund Pendeldon, and George Wythe, and they're going to undertake to rewrite the whole system of laws for Virginia. Like he hasn't had enough on his plate in 1776, and he undertake. I mean, I don't think people understand that if Jefferson did nothing other than write in 1774 and 1776 his Declaration and his, and the bills that he proposed when he began writing these in 1776, just his work on the Congress and the bills that he proposed in Virginia would make him an extraordinarily significant founding father. He went on to do Secretary of State, Minister Plenipotentiary, Vice President, President, founding University of Virginia. These accomplishments are extraordinary. To reduce him today, as it is often done, to someone who's just a slave holder and owner is entirely ridiculous, just in terms of the contributions. I just want to add the contributions he made in the giving, the time he gave his time and his life to a cause, namely independence. So that's something that people just never put in context today. I don't know why. I wish they would. Did I answer your question? That's going to change this to one word, 6 questions, by the way.
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. I just wanted to clarify that whether that this action on education, whether it predated his time as governor,
he's governor 1779, 1781.
Yeah. Okay.
June 1 to June 2, 1781. And that's when the war is raging. It's raging before that, obviously, but the war is raging and the British come to Virginia. So pre-gubernatorial years.
All righty. Now, question number one, the real question number one. Would you summarize for us what this bill was all about?
Well, if you look at the title, Bill for the More General Diffusion of Knowledge, the title says everything. I mean, I'm looking at the bill right now. The question is, summarize. It's going to give a bill it's going to be the first bill for a complete system of education. And I emphasize the word system of education. There's never been a system of education in Virginia before. The wealthy people who have birth and wealth, or at least they think they have birth because they have wealth, are going to have their kids educated. They're going to get educated. They're going to pay. Thomas's father paid for his education, and they paid for Randolph's education. And then when his father dies, Randolph still gets educated. They're born into wealth. They're born into property. So the wealthy are going to get educated. But this is a bill that proposes to give all people access to education. Of course, he's talking about young white Virginians. And it's an important thing nonetheless, that he's opened this up so that all people have access to education. I think I saw one of your later questions, maybe question 3. He wants, because he sees, as he says to John Adams in a subsequent letter about genius, about the natural edistory. You and I talked about this before. Mm-hmm. Adams talks about the edistory being the wealthy, the privileged, the people who are well-born, and he even goes on to say the good-looking people, right? Well, the handsome people. And Jefferson realizes, well, this is, a political definition. He thinks literally within the people who are not among the wealthy and well-born, there are so many people that are of good intelligence, of high intelligence, and of good moral standing, moral character, that get prohibited from being able to, from public service, just because they don't have access to education. So he wants to open the playing field. So the idea is what kind of, what the bill was about. The bill was about offering a system of education where you'd have the ward schools. You would develop wards, 10 by 10 mile squares, or 6 by 6 miles, he says elsewhere. In every ward, there'd be a justice of the peace, right? There'd be a ward school teaching, as he says later in the bill, a ward school teaching reading, writing. Where is that? These grammar schools, the ward schools, reading, writing, basically, and arithmetic, right? That's section 6. He talks in the bill. Reading, writing, and common arithmetics, and he talks about the books, right? Acquainted with Greek, Roman, English, and American history, right? At these schools, all the free children, male and female, residing within shall be entitled to receive tuition gratis for the terms of 3 years, as much longer as their private expense. So they get, it's for males and females, right? Free, born, the white males and females. And they get 3 years at public expense through taxes. And if they want more and they need more, parents will have to, you know. So the idea is to have ward schools, then what are called colleges or grammar schools, and then something, an institution like William and Mary, right, college, or the University of Virginia later on, for the people who really want to pursue the highest levels of education, science and you know, political careers and things like that, you know. So that's the highest level for people who are going to be the future high-level politicians and so forth. So it's a system of education, and I should say, to end the answer to your question, I'll go back and elaborate on this because it's not, my answer is not complete. There never was a system of education in Virginia, and the wealthy did not want one, right? I hope you understand why, because their kids are going to get an education. When they get an education and the poor people don't, their kids are going to be the ones running affairs, political affairs, government affairs, things like that.
Is it fair to say that what Jefferson had in mind in terms of the education mirrored somewhat the Roman imperial school curriculum with the trivium and the quadrium, which was later adopted by the people of the High Middle Ages? You can sense that a bit, I would argue, and maybe that makes sense because he was a classical student of Greece and Rome, so that would fit, would it not?
It would, but I don't know that he's looking in the past for any models. I really don't think he is. Mm-hmm. The one thing he is looking at the past for is reading material. He was heavily invested in that the education, especially at the grammar schools, you'll be reading Greek and Latin, history, Greek and Latin. You'll be studying languages at the grammar schools. Now, say the grammar schools for Jefferson, he talks of like an institution like William and Mary, and William and Mary needed to have an overhaul. That was one of Jefferson's other bills, changing the nature, making it a secular institution, not an ecclesiastical one. But how do you go from the grammar schools to University of Virginia? In a weird sense, I argue, and I think this is correct, that Jefferson did not need a bridge, right? You're a young kid when you're studying at the ward schools, but you don't have maturation just to jump from ward schools to William and Mary or University of Virginia. So you need an education in between. And Jefferson thinks the rational faculty is not well developed enough. So what can you do? You can read history. You can sort of bolster your moral sense faculty, your aesthetic faculty. Read history, study languages. Because young minds, at least the story goes, young minds readily pick up languages, and old minds can't do that. I don't know how true that is, but there's probably something to it.
Yeah.
That's a question, by the way, Dave, that It's going to cost you. You're throwing out, that's your seventh question. That's your third question already. We haven't even got to question two.
And speaking of which, here's number two coming at you.
All right. Number four.
And that is, I think we've kind of answered this to a degree, but give you a chance to add more to it if you'd like. What were Jefferson's views on education, and what kind of education did he have in mind, and for what purpose? Now, is there anything else you want to add with that?
Yeah, there's a lot. I didn't answer that in the first one at all. What was different about Jefferson's pencil disappeared? Jefferson's views on education, because his educational views were shaped in conformancy. Very important point, in conformancy with his political views, which were based on his moral views. The moral views, and he drew from the ancients, not so much to get a curriculum for an education system. He didn't really do that. He drew from the ancients in some sense to get a notion of for what it meant to have to live a good life, a virtuous life, a happy life. He thought the end of any political institution, as did Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, so forth, was to make the polis, the city-state, the Greeks and Romans said happy, and by happy they just meant thriving, fruitful. Jefferson wanted happy people, and his definition of happiness was lined up neatly with Greek and Roman virtuous ethics theorists, meaning people who are virtuous, productive, contributing members. You're giving, as Plato says in his Republic, book 4, the people that Adeimantus is talking with Socrates in there, and then Adeimantus says, well, look, the people who are at the highest levels, the guardians are giving the most. They get the least out of this. Why does anybody want to be a guardian when you got to do all the studying? You got to give so much. And Plato says famously through Socrates, we're not aiming at making everyone uniquely or ultimately happy, but making all people happy insofar as the whole system can be a happy system. There has to be a sort of organic unity to the system. Mm-hmm. And he meant that quite clearly. And I think Jefferson's doing the same thing. So Jefferson had in mind, his republicanism, his government of and by the people, through elected representatives. They are recallable. They must be watched. They're chosen on account of their virtue and their genius. By genius, he just means high intelligence. They're watched by the people because people in power for a certain amount of time tend to abuse that power. And the system, just like Plato's system in Republic, requires fullest participation by all members. And that means if you're a farmer and you don't have much time, you're at least going to be within your ward participating politically, meaning you're going to be jury duty or voting at the very least. But you have to. That's what's different about today, is we want to be critical about everything, but we don't want to participate. So, I'll go back to the idea is, so that the answer to this question is his views of education were shaped by his political views, and his political views, conversely, were shaped by his educational views. The idea of having happy citizens, so morality was the focus. We want all people, we want to encourage moral behavior. We want to encourage the intelligent and moral people to become leading politicians and teachers and the scientists of our day. So we want a virtuous system. So, and the whole point is that Jefferson not only wants a system of education, he's offering us a political philosophy, right? Based on a moral philosophy. He's giving us a whole system where you have a moral underpinning, you have a political system, and then you have an educational system that work hand in glove. This is not quite a good hand in glove analogy, but I don't have a glove with me, so I can't do hand in glove. Does that answer the question? I hope it does.
Oh, yeah. Which gets us to the third question, and that is Jefferson spoke of genius and virtue, and you addressed those. Would you tell us what these were, what Jefferson had in mind with these, and why he saw them as so important to the maintenance of liberty? Is there anything
Yeah, I talked to this in the first question, and let me iterate what I said there. Okay. genius just means high intelligence. Doesn't mean what we mean by genius today, where we mean someone of extraordinary, like an Albert Einstein or an Isaac Newton or a Thomas Jefferson, right? I was talked into, there was a time when someone asked me, was Jefferson a genius? And my answer was no, right? Because he didn't come up with anything really novel. He was more of a plugger away, if that makes sense.
He was
plugged
more
away
innovative and inventive.
Yeah, I mean, he was somewhat inventive. But I mean, he didn't have a brain like an Isaac Newton, let's put it that way, or an Archimedes, right? One of my favorites, or an Aristotle. He didn't invent things from scratch. He was a plugger along. I mean, he would just work and work and work at something. I mean, if you look at his political philosophy, for example, it's not perfectly new, but nonetheless, he's drawing from the virtue ethic Greek and Roman thinkers. He's also drawing from the moral thinkers and the political philosophers of his day, the utopists, Thomas More, other, Condorcet, other people talking about utopia and so forth. And he's drawing Louis Sebastien Mercier. There is a book for you, by the way, Land 2440. I don't know if you've ever read that. Strongly
I know of it.
The year 24. Jefferson's political views are almost strikingly exactly the same as Mercier's. Almost. I'm not saying that he read Mercier. Read that book, because you're going to see someone whose political views are so similar to Jefferson's more than anybody else I know of. Very good, very, very good book. So when he talks about genius and virtue, he wants a system that can be put in place that encourages the intelligent and the virtuous people to be in office. Therefore, they're not going to exploit their position of power to their own benefit. They're going to have an eye, like Plato said, they're going to have an eye at their own expense to benefiting the general citizenry. Let's go back to that point, at their own expense. This is where Jefferson differed from people like Hamilton. Hamilton was very ambitious. He loved political power and military rank because he liked the notoriety. A lot of scholars argued Jefferson said he didn't, but he really did. It was Meacham talking about Jefferson and power, the art of power and stuff. I don't think that's true. I really think he disliked, displays of power. He realized by his second term that maybe he realized he's just the best person to be president of the United States, to try to implement the sort of Jeffersonian Republican reforms of government of and by the people that are needed, right? Agrarian reforms and things like that. So genius, so genius and intelligence, just want a system in which those could flourish.
Okay. Now, number 4, how does Jefferson's educational system, the general diffusion of knowledge, compare to the educational system or systems we have in place today? Any salient differences there that you want to highlight, or similarities?
Well, the salient difference is, as I stated before, is that Jefferson is interested in a system of education, and that system fits hand in glove, with his political views. I don't think we think of education that. Do we really worry about today education being something that that bolsters our views of free speech, independence? We do have a lot of people talking about that, but in the educational, I've been 33 plus years in the educational system at the college, university level. At various schools. At some point, they got tired of me and kicked me out and told me to go elsewhere. But what happened in the final years sort of sickened me. And this, I won't name any institutions, but it's become a business. And we were encouraged, for example, teaching philosophy, to try to get people to major in philosophy, whether or not they were suited to doing philosophy, because by having more majors, There's more revenue from the institution coming into the philosophy department, the ability to bring on more professors and things like that. And the argument being, if we don't get, and to get people to come to a particular school, because if we don't get them, some other institution is going to get them. It becomes a business. Really, it got that way, and it sickened me. It really did, because I didn't become a philosopher. At one institution, there was one serious requirement to get a philosophy degree. I won't name the institution, but you had to take critical thinking. Other than that, you can take courses like philosophy of the Simpsons, philosophy of Married with Children, right? Philosophy of Star Trek. Right? I'm not saying some of these courses are fairly inventive, but if you graduate from an institution with a degree in philosophy and you want to go up to Stanford or the great University of Michigan, #1 football team in the country this year, sorry, I blurted that out. If you want to get to a high-level school like that, you need epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, logic, right? Things like that. And if you're not making them part of the requirement, you're cheapening the discipline.
Exactly.
Right? And it's in my view was, and I didn't fit in neatly at this institution, I'll say bluntly, it was sort of tossed out after a year, was that not all people are cut out to be philosophers. I want to make sure that if we're bringing a person in who's a philosophy major, you can succeed in getting your undergraduate and succeed, if you want, to the next level. I've actually told in many places that I had people who wanted to go to graduate school, and sometimes I just flatly discourage some people without telling them you're not cut out for it. I try to encourage them and say, look, something else might be better suited for you. It's just not going to work for you. And sometimes when it works for you, you get a job, you get a degree, you can't get a job. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, in one sense, education today is a matter of, it's consumerism, I think, even at the college levels. And in Jefferson's day, Jefferson was the first person to encourage at the university level elective education. You can go in there and pick the courses you want. You weren't told what you had to do. William and Mary, as we talked about, gave you an ecclesiastical education, and they were interested in putting out ministers of the church, right? Anglican ministers. And Jefferson wanted a secular education. They wanted useful education, right? So to answer your question, I mean, the systems today, I'm not so sure there's a system, and I might be wrong here, but I'm not so sure that education is so systematic. It seems to be driven by how institutions are going to succeed financially. At least it is increasingly driven by that consideration, in my humble estimation. And you talk about elective education. Jefferson meant elective education among useful subjects that are going to broaden you, right? Mathematics, applied mathematics, physics, and things like that. Astronomy, medicine, first professorship of medicine I think it was at William and Mary, or was it UVA? I don't remember which school, but he was behind that either way. But I mean, he wanted a useful education. Today, I'm not so sure we care whether or not people are getting useful education. And an education is going to come back to benefit the system.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Now, what might Jefferson say about education today, particularly in diffusing knowledge and preserving liberty?
I really hate questions like that. I always hate the questions where, what would Jefferson say today? I told you before, my first answer is always, and people hate when I answer it this way, he's dead. I don't know what he'd say. But of course, you didn't say what would he say, you said what might he say.
Exactly.
So, you can only wallow in surmise here. But you mentioned diffusing knowledge and preserving liberty. Let's talk of each of those seriatim. First, diffusing knowledge. By diffusion of knowledge, Jefferson meant having the general citizenry be widely educated, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and any other things that might prove of use. If you want a system that's going to be predominantly a system of husbandmen, of farmers, they need to read and write to exchange bills of sales in their commerce, and they need common arithmetic, and they need geometry to be able to parcel out. We talked of, in my book on Jefferson Randolph Hemmings, in Randolph Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, Randolph Jefferson, Thomas recommends a system, we talked of this, for rotation of crops. And he goes, in your first fields, you should probably start off breaking them into two, and then grow this and this the first year, and the next year do that. And the second one, break that one into two and grow this and this the next year, that the third year. And then he goes on to the other field and breaks that up and has advice for what he should grow, when he should grow it. And by the end of the day, Randolph is utterly confused. He goes, I wholeheartedly agree with what you say about, but it's too complex to implement right. Of course, Randolph doesn't say implement. He goes, I can't figure this. Jeff needs to think, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. That's all. So education, so diffusion of knowledge, Jefferson is very interested in all people having access to education. I think we share the same today. We share the same goal that all people should have access to education. And of course, there are all sorts of attempts to making sure that all people everywhere, even in underprivileged or areas, are giving access to quality education. At least we're trying to do that. Now, preservation of liberty. Jefferson, as we know, for the professorship of law in politics at UVA, this is the only time where he required certain readings. And people say, well, that's dogmatic when someone thinks you can, that the sort of liberty he preaches means the ability for professors to choose their own books. But here, teaching law, politics, you can't. You're going to read the Declaration of Independence, Washington's farewell address, among other things, but Jefferson was in some sense concerned that you weren't bringing in sort of federalist dogmata. He wanted to ensure that the books and the readings that you were taught would be readings that encourage you to embrace liberty and open-mindedness, not closed-mindedness, not sort of willowy and twisty interpretations of the Constitution, but strict constructions of the Constitution. Writings that encourage you to respect everybody's rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. So in some sense, is it really restrictive to say we want readings that encourage open-mindedness and not closed-mindedness? I leave that as, if you're really open-minded, wouldn't you be open-minded about including if a professor wants closed-minded readings? I leave that as an open.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. But, you'd think, well, why doesn't Jefferson just trust, you're going to choose certain people to teach at the law professorship, political professorships. Why not just trust the person to use good judgment in picking readings that will promote liberty? But is that really? I mean, we have several institutions across the country that are more right-wing. I'm neither right nor left, by the way, but more right-wing, and that are talking about instructing us and teaching us to love the country and to think about preservation of liberty and things like that. There's the other school of thought too, by radical leftists, that just thinks, true embrace of liberty means being able to do whatever you want all the time and any way you want to do, and that's what we really are after. In some sense, we don't need anybody telling us what we can and can't do. I'm not here to try to answer that question, but Jefferson was trying to implement a system of education. He was concerned that his republicanism might be, and he was worried that after the Adams administration, when he took the office in 1801, that we were moving away, we're moving towards a British system, a tyrannical system. And as I said before, and this makes sense to you, if we're going to start a revolution, like Hamilton thought the British system of government was perfect. If we're going to start a revolution and then implement the same form of government from which we revolted, what sense does that make?
None.
None. So it's a tough question. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking that maybe part of this educational concept that Jefferson had, in fact, I'd argue it is part of it, in addition to the formal schooling that he's proposing that people get at various levels and for different subject matter and actually common matter at the same time, that there's a lot to be left aside for someone becoming an autodidact all their lives. So that, this curriculum, this education that people are receiving under the Jeffersonian model will be something that they'll take back home and not just put on a shelf, but resume with learning until they pass on. So, you could argue that this education that he's proposing goes far beyond just the formal format. It's something I thought about.
That's entirely correct. You're entirely right. In my book on Jefferson's education philosophy, I mentioned that in the final chapter, we talk about education as lifelong learning. Jefferson always thought that you can tell by just any biography that you read on Jefferson, if it's done correctly, this is a guy who's obsessed with learning. No matter where he goes, what he does, he says to, I think, a daughter, there's not a sprig of grass that turns uninteresting to me. Everywhere you go, the guy wants to learn something. I used to tell my students, if you imagine going for a walk with Thomas Jefferson out in the countryside, you'd be engaged in conversation and you're making some point and, flapping your, gesticulating and making some point, and you look back and he's gone. He's examining some flower that's just unusual, has never seen before, or something that looks like a cricket grasshopper or a tributary of a river. He's just that sort of person. He just was ever curious. And boy, would that have been fun to be around a guy like that.
Wow. It would have been hard to stay up with him, but it would have been enlightening, literally. We're at about 1 minute now, just to let you know.
Okay. Yeah, I got carried away here. I don't have something picked out for next week. We did do, how about the second inaugural address? You want to do that?
Sure. That sounds fun.
Okay. We've done the first. We've done the Bill for General Diffusion of Knowledge. So this will be called the Bill for General Diffusion of Knowledge Redux. And actually, we've covered it. Your questions covered it in a much different way than those of Donna. So this will be a very interesting episode. Anyways, I think this one went really well. And I think you asked some really good questions. And your final comment was very helpful. Education is lifelong learning. I couldn't agree more. All right, David, we'll see you next week at this same time, same